It's 2 in the morning. I really should not be recording right now. However, I have been enthralled and enraptured by the Under the Breach but with Jenny thing I've been writing. Again, I do recommend you pick up that story because otherwise this isn't gonna make sense. This one has spoilers for chapter 19, so if you haven't gotten to there in Unto the Breach yet, you should do that because this does have spoilers. There's also canon divergence, and I'm not going to tell you guys which part is the spoilers. You're just going to have to read the story. Deal. Anyway, I should probably just get into it. I need to find the... Okay. So, you somehow know everything about this alternate dimension and all its monsters, and the only person you told was Eddie? Lucas asked, not convinced. Yeah, we exchanged hair care tips, and I told him about the things I thought he could handle. I didn't tell him everything, because some things are better left unknown. Clearly, I did not prepare him enough, because this moron went into a gate on his own volition, got stuck there, and didn't consistently keep his face covered while knowing that the air down there can irritate his lungs and already smoking. Another objectively stupid decision on his part. In my defense, I saved your life. Yeah, and now I'm going to have nightmares about the Demogorgon ripping your face open on top of the ones I got from basically watching you die. Hooray! You thwarted me again. Let's not get into this in front of the children. Steve took that opportunity to butt in. Aren't you also a child? You're like 13. Shut it, babysitter. I taught myself more life skills than your mostly absent parents learned in their lives. The silence was loud. Sorry. I shouldn't have called you babysitter. That implies you're getting paid for inevitably taking care of these rugrats. What was it you said about time travel? Dustin asked, quickly changing the subject. I went back in time 2 years, 4 months, and 23 days, and I have a theory as to why, but I have no desire nor ability to test its efficacy. I have proof. Eddie's favorite song that he's likely been humming the last few days is called Master of Puppets, and it hasn't been released yet. Also, I have a chronological list of monster attacks in my notebook with as much detail as I could manage, she commented casually, setting her backpack down and unloading her Molotov components and retrieving her notebook. Didn't I give that to you for your birthday when I tried to guess? Dustin asked, examining the cover. Yes, you were wrong, by the way. It's in October. This is now my monster manual of sorts. It has the CR of the monsters, roughly how many hits it takes for each to go down, abilities, resistances, how many there are, and most importantly, when and where encounters take place. Mike scowled at her. That sounds like D&D. Girls don't like that kind of stuff, he huffed indignantly. Eddie taught me. I'll play Barbarian mostly because Hellfire needs more tanks, and I like making my half-orc Barbarian be really sweet and calm most of the time until someone in her party gets hurt. Then she flips out and will desecrate the corpses of her slain enemies by stealing their teeth so she can make them into jewelry as a reminder that she believes in diplomacy, but hurting her friends makes the only mercy you can hope for a swift death. Will's eyes lit up. You play D&D? He asked in awe. Future tense. I will play D&D. I don't have any character sheets made or anything. I just have 2.5 years of knowledge floating around in my brain next to my contingency for being a vampire. And every single time one of my parents have smiled at me. I can count that number on 2 hands. Steve winced in sympathy. He knew that feeling far too intimately for comfort. Eddie paged through the monster manual as they were talking and paused. Hold on, I know you wrote the date, but when was this? Last I remember, it was just a fire, Eddie said, pointing at the entry that read 4th of July Mind Flayer attack at Starcourt Mall. That was a cover-up and really traumatic for everyone involved. I'd really like to prevent that one entirely, as Jenny trailed off as she pointed to a passage that read, creature made up of the amalgamated flesh of approximately 30 people, some dead rats, and transdimensional particles that possessed William Byers in previous entry. Jesus H. Christ, and you just kept going after that? That sounds horrifying. Believe me, take what everything you're imagining, multiply it by a spider, and add 10 feet. Good lord. Never fear, I have a plan for how to avoid that thing. The plan is make sure it isn't already out and about, then close the mother gate so it can't possess people and rats and melt their flesh into a 30-foot tall flesh spider. There was a moment of silence when everyone was staring at the two of them. I hated just that mental image. That's disgusting, Steve commented with a shiver. You were coming down from a high caused by a Russian nerve agent and were heavily concussed when this happened. I was in the vents of the Russian base with Dustin listening to you cry out in agony for several hours until, and I'm skipping the escape plot here, you ended up in the bathroom throwing up while your lesbian coworker came out to you. It was a very memorable 4th of July. Moral of the story, don't investigate the Russian transmission coming from under the mall. It will give you permanent brain damage. Leave it to the cops. I'm starting to believe this whole time travel thing, but I still don't believe you and Eddie aren't up to something, Lucas mullishly admitted. Oh, Lucas, just wait until I start babysitting your sister on the regular. She will out-nerd you in the most fantastic way possible. Speaking of babysitting, you boys, and Minnie if she wants, are coming with me. Dustin, your mom wanted you home hours ago. Lucas's parents think he's at Dustin's, and Nancy and Steve are literally here to take Mike home. Besides, the Demogorgon is going to come back in a few hours, and none of you need to have that experience. Jenny said, passing the alcohol and scrap fabric to Eddie. Eddie nodded and started making more Molotovs. But Mike tried to protest. Will is included in the you boys statement. I know Mrs. Byers would prefer if he didn't get abducted again, and my living room doesn't have an angry portal to another dimension. A portal which has historically attacked people. Steve! Minnie gets to choose because she is incredibly strong and can handle herself. Jenny shot him down immediately. She didn't look directly at Elle, knowing the girl was timid and had not the greatest history with eye contact. Can I stay with Mike? Elle asked quietly, fiddling with her fingers. Of course. I can find some more clothes you can use for my closet, Jenny affirmed, with a gentle tone to match Elle's energy. People would ask fewer questions if the girl had multiple outfits anyway. Nancy glanced at Barb and said, Well, I'm staying here. I'll call Mom about Barb being found as long as you make sure that you call her about Will. Mike nodded exasperatedly. Nancy, the cover story is that Eddie, Barb, and Will were chased into the woods by a wild animal and got turned around. The boys found Will in the forest after he got separated and ended up at Dustin's after you guys left to check the woods. You found Barb and Eddie along the way. Do any of you have any plot holes I should know about so that this story is believable? After a chorus of no's and head shakes, Jenny sighed with relief. All right, then, you little nuggets, get in my car. We're having a sleepover. Steve had to leave before Jenny finished making all the boys promise to call their parents when they got to her house and piled into the car. Will was sitting shotgun, already dozing off, and the other four were packed like sardines in the back seat. Mike, being the indignant putz he was, asked how she could drive with kids in the car when she was only a year older than them. Parental abandonment and identity fraud, aided and abetted by the cops, she said simply, not elaborating on the issue. She drove them all to her house and made Mike call his mother first and apologized for worrying her. Jenny added that Nancy and Steve had stopped by earlier before the boys had showed up at her house because Will had been found in the woods alive and that she would get a hold of them to call off the search. Mrs. Wheeler thanked her for being so responsible and scolded Mike for pulling that kind of stunt. Mike could not procure permission to stay the night until Jenny added that she could babysit him for free to save Mrs. Wheeler the trouble of picking him up this late at night. She smiled at Mike after hanging up. The only reason I'm allowing this is because 11 wanted to come because of you. I'm also building a rapport with your mother so she'll have a reliable babysitter. Lucas, call your parents. She shouted into the other room, Lucas scurrying over to call his parents. Jenny also got his parents to agree with the free babysitting plan. Dustin probably would have slept over anyway because Mrs. Henderson trusted her to watch him before all of this. 11. I'll help you find some PJs and some clothes for tomorrow. There's blankets and pillows in the cabinet under the stairs. Go nuts, she said, taking the girl's hand and showing her some of her old clothes that didn't fit anymore, but she insisted on keeping them, the main reason being that she could reuse the fabric. 11 looked at the selection in awe. I can pick? She asked in timid disbelief. She didn't really know Jenny yet, but Eddie trusted her, and she was giving her new clothes. Surely she wouldn't let the bad men hurt her. She knew about the monsters and Elle's powers, but she didn't treat her like she was different. It was nice. Jenny was nice, 11 decided. She carefully looked over the selection of colorful sweaters and skirts before deciding on a chunky red sweater that was still a bit big and a frilly pink skirt that fit perfectly. I like these. Great, you can have them. What do you think about using this nightgown for PJs? I can find something else if you don't like it, Jenny said gently. Elle looked over the loose pink garment carefully before nodding. It was pretty and soft, unlike the things she had to wear when she was with Papa. Jenny handed her the nightgown. All right, the bathroom is just through that door so you can change, she said, pointing to the door and walking a bit further down the hall to see what the boys were doing. Jenny sighed. She'd have to go back to get the boys' bikes after they were all asleep. Jenny looked at the kids in her living room, laying atop fuzzy blankets and couch cushions. Will was already asleep, wrapped in Mike's arms. Dustin and Lucas were quietly chatting, but also drifting off. 11 slipped next to Mike and Will and was out like a light. Jenny snapped a Polaroid of them and smiled. Eddie would enjoy this. Now that she thought about it, this time maybe she could actually help him to graduate on time. It would be really funny when his bandmates found out he was being tutored by a 13-year-old. Boy, was she glad she remembered Eddie's set list from Battle in the Bands. They'd accept her more readily if she was able to mesh with their music. Hellfire Club was still very small, Eddie and a couple freshmen that would still be there when she got into it. By getting into it, she meant tutoring Eddie so he didn't flunk everything, and being convinced to try out D&D. She won Jeff over with an in-depth explanation as to why, if magic was real, very few people would actually put in the effort to learn it. And Eddie had been the one to propose her joining the group. She'd incorporate things Eddie was learning into Dungeons and Dragons terms, or just have her character make literary references while playing. She also had used physics to talk her way out of multiple situations in character. The rest of the group came to the conclusion that her character, Chorn, was somehow cursed with low intelligence and wisdom, but on occasion her true genius would emerge, and she'd do some real-world chemistry. Jenny always found the in-universe explanation hilarious and leaned into it. She was excited to get to do it all over again. And that is the end of this section. I wrote another section. I'm still working on it because I really enjoy this. And also, oh boy. We didn't get to the chapter 19 spoilers this time, but next time, oh boy. Oh boy, oh boy. Good afternoon, good morning, good night, whatever time it is for you. Have a good time. Peace.